From the outside, Heath Ledger was everything we admire. Talented, charismatic, a rising star who left a legacy with one of the most iconic performances in cinema history. But behind the Joker's grin was a man quietly unraveling. Today, we're uncovering the real cost of brilliance, the anxiety, the perfectionism, the weight of living up to impossible expectations, and how Ledger's final role became both his masterpiece and his breaking point. Heath Ledger grew up in Perth, one of the most isolated cities in the world, a long way from red carpets and flashing cameras. But even as a child, he stood out. Not because he craved attention, but because he was full of energy that needed somewhere to go. His sister was the first to put him on stage in a school play, and something clicked. Acting wasn't just a hobby, it was an outlet. His parents describe him as restless even back then, building things, taking them apart, mimicking voices, obsessed with movement and emotion. From the start, it wasn't about being seen. It was about feeling. And that drive, the need to express something internal, would follow him for the rest of his life, through every role and every private battle. His first big break came at just 20 years old in 10 Things I Hate About You. Overnight, he was everywhere. Teenage girls taping his posters to their walls, magazines calling him the next big thing. Hollywood opened its gates. He could have coasted from there, taken every lead in every rom-com for the next 10 years. But something in him resisted. Heath knew the attention wasn't for him. It was for a version of him. Charming, good-looking, effortless. And nothing about him actually felt effortless. Behind the grin was someone deeply serious about the craft, who wanted to be challenged. The spotlight didn't scare him. What scared him was becoming a product of it. To the public, Ledger was a heartthrob. The smirk, the accent, the promise of stardom. But to those who knew him, he seemed uncomfortable in that skin. He didn't like being reduced to just a face, or worse, a brand. He kept the press at arm's length, dodged paparazzi, and rolled his eyes at interviews that only asked about his looks. In private, he gravitated toward directors who wanted something deeper, scripts that unsettled him, roles that forced him into unknown territory. There was a quiet rebellion in how he carried himself, an instinct to avoid becoming defined, as if he knew early on that once the industry decides who you are, it rarely lets you be anything else. Ledger's closest friends describe him as someone always searching for stimulation, for truth, for escape. He could be the life of the party one day and disappear into solitude the next. On set, he was all in. Intensely focused, completely immersed. Off set, he sometimes withdrew, drained by the same emotional intensity that made him great. He filled journals with sketches or music, thoughts that wandered into philosophy or poetry. He didn't just act, he studied people, observed how they moved, how they reacted. There was a vulnerability to him, too, a sensitivity that made the world feel louder, heavier. He was loved, but often lonely. And he carried that tension quietly, like a man constantly tuning the strings of his own mind. After 10 Things, Ledger was flooded with offers, leading man roles, franchise money, all the things a young actor is supposed to chase. He turned most of them down. Instead, he took a role in Brokeback Mountain, a quiet, painful story about love, repression, and identity. It was a massive risk at the time, but Ledger didn't see it that way. He saw depth, complexity. He chanced to disappear into a character who felt real. He wasn't trying to shock Hollywood, he was trying to find something true. And in doing that, he broke through again, but this time not as a teen idol, as an artist, It was the beginning of a new chapter, one that would take him to his greatest performance, and eventually his greatest cost. Heath Ledger didn't just play roles, he inhabited them. Directors often talk about how he would show up with a notebook full of sketches, backstory, and questions that no one else thought to ask. He needed to understand the character from the inside out. Their fears, their private habits, how they'd hold a spoon or sit in silence. When he filmed Brokeback Mountain, he physically changed his posture and even how he breathed. Ang Lee said Heath brought a level of truth that could not be taught. But with that depth came a price. He didn't know how to switch it off. The intensity that made him great also made him vulnerable. He carried characters with him, sometimes for weeks, and they didn't always let go when the camera stopped rolling. Ledger was pulled between two forces, the need to protect his integrity and the reality of sustaining a career in Hollywood. He hated repeating himself. He feared being boxed in, commodified, or softened for mass appeal. But he also knew the industry well enough to see how it worked. There were moments, like when he briefly considered quitting acting, that revealed how deeply torn he was. The work fulfilled him, but the machinery around it often drained him. He wanted creative freedom, but he also had to navigate contracts, agents, image building. It wasn't about ego, it was about survival. How do you stay true to your art in a system that constantly tries to reshape you? Heath Ledger spoke openly and uncomfortably about the anxiety that followed him. In interviews, he'd mention it almost in passing, how he struggled to sleep, how his mind wouldn't slow down. During the press tour for The Dark Knight, he told the New York Times, "Last week I probably slept 2 hours a night. My body was exhausted and my mind was still going. He'd pace hotel rooms, take long walks alone, scribble in notebooks until dawn. Sometimes he took sleeping pills just to find a little quiet." This wasn't just method acting, it was a brain that couldn't shut off. Even when things were going well professionally, there was always an undercurrent of restlessness, of needing to be better, do more, go deeper. People around Heath started noticing patterns. Christopher Nolan once said Ledger had a terrifying level of commitment, that he didn't hold anything back, and that level of emotional immersion worried some of his friends. He didn't just pretend to be characters, he disappeared into them. He'd isolate during shoots, push his body to extremes, lose track of time. It was never reckless, but it was intense. Too intense, maybe, for someone who already carried so much inner pressure. There were whispers, even before The Dark Knight, that he might be burning out. Not because he wasn't good enough, but because he was trying too hard to be perfect. And perfection, for someone like Heath, was never a destination. It was a chase. In one of his last interviews, Heath Ledger said something that lingers. "I feel like I'm constantly chasing something, and I'm never quite sure what it is." That sentence says everything. He wasn't just acting in roles. He was searching for parts of himself in them. And sometimes he'd get lost in the process. Friends noticed he'd return from shoots quieter, thinner, more detached. He once told a friend that he felt erased after certain roles, as if he'd left pieces of himself behind. That kind of emotional honesty is rare and haunting, because by the time he became the Joker, the performance that would immortalize him, something inside Heath was already unraveling. And no one, not even he, could fully see it coming. When Heath Ledger accepted the role of the Joker, it wasn't about franchise fame or box office potential. It was about transformation. He wanted to obliterate the version of himself that Hollywood had come to expect. The Joker was the perfect opportunity. Chaotic, unpredictable, completely detached from vanity. Heath saw it not as a villain, but as a psychological puzzle. A creature without limits or conscience. He was drawn to the danger of it. This was a role where he could lose himself, and that was the point. For him, the Joker was an artistic dare. How far could he go? How deeply could he disappear? And beneath that question was a deeper one he may never have said aloud. What would it cost to find out? Christopher Nolan, who directed The Dark Knight, recalls Ledger's preparation as both astonishing and unnerving. He described Heath as arriving with a fully formed vision of the voice, the laugh, even the way he moved. It wasn't the cartoonish villain people expected. It was something darker, something real. Nolan gave him space, trusted his instincts. What he saw on set was total immersion. Heath wasn't playing the Joker, he was channeling him. Nolan later said he'd never worked with anyone so committed, so fearless in their choices. But there was also an intensity to it that was hard to miss. It was brilliant, yes, but you could tell even then that it wasn't just acting. In the months leading up to filming, Ledger isolated himself in a London hotel room. No distractions, no outside world. Just a man, a character, and a locked door. He kept a journal, wrote in it daily as the Joker. Lines of dialogue, twisted thoughts, observations through the lens of chaos. He experimented with voices and laughs, practiced in front of mirrors, let the character slowly take over. He wanted to understand what made the Joker tick, not in a comic book sense, but psychologically. Ledger once said the Joker was a psychopathic, mass-murdering, schizophrenic clown with zero empathy. And he meant to live inside that headspace fully. The deeper he went, the less he came back up for air. While he prepared, friends noticed changes in him. He lost weight. He stopped sleeping. His energy came in short, manic bursts, followed by long period stretches of quiet exhaustion. He spoke often of his insomnia, how his mind wouldn't stop racing. Even when filming began, the problem didn't ease. His father later said Heath was surviving on cocktails of medications just to get some rest. He didn't complain, but the toll was clear. Behind the scenes, he'd looked worn down, pale, wired. He'd once joked about being a night owl, but it wasn't just quirky behavior. It was a system breaking down slowly. And while the performance that emerged was iconic, it was built on a body and a mind running on fumes. After his death, the journal Ledger used while preparing for the Joker was revealed to the public, and it offered a haunting window into his process. The pages were filled with cutouts of clowns, violent sketches, twisted jokes, and scrolled phrases like inside, outside, nothing. There were references to A Clockwork Orange, to chaos theory, to the unsettling glee of causing pain. It was method acting, yes, but it was also something more. A kind of deep psychological immersion that blurred the line between role and reality. In the back of the journal, Ledger wrote a simple goodbye. Whether it was to the character or to something else, no one can say for sure. But what's clear is this: the Joker didn't just live on the page, he lived in Heath. Ledger didn't settle for a great performance. He demanded something extraordinary, unforgettable. And in every performance, he pushed himself beyond what most actors would ever risk. Every twitch in of the eye, every lurching movement of the Joker's body was thought through, lived in, earned. But that level of performance, of perfectionism, when combined with Heath's own anxieties, became a trap. He couldn't just play, he had to behave the Joker. And in doing so, he stopped sleeping, stopped resting, stopped eating, protecting himself. Friends later said he was proud of the work, but visibly drained. The Joker was the role of a lifetime. But for Heath Ledger, it was also the beginning of a quiet unraveling, one that wouldn't fully show itself until it was too late. On set, Heath Ledger was electric. Even seasoned actors were taken aback by the intensity he brought to the role. Crew members would describe moments where the air shifted when he walked into a scene, staying in character, often without speaking. He'd stay in character, and the energy around him would change. People admired his focus. They called it genius, but between takes he rarely relaxed. While others socialized, Heath stayed distant, often in his own head. Gary Oldman said it felt like Heath was on a high wire. He wasn't unkind, just absorbed, unreachable. There was respect, even awe, for what he was doing. But there was also an unspoken sense that he was carrying more than just a role. He was carrying something heavier. The anxiety that had followed Heath for years became more than just a bad habit. It became a crisis. In interviews during the Dark Knight production, he mentioned sleeping 2 hours a night. "I couldn't stop thinking. My mind was just too loud," he said. To cope, he began taking a mix of prescription medications, some to help him sleep, others to ease anxiety. It wasn't a secret to those close to him. He was open about the struggle, but also insistent on managing it himself. There's no single moment when it became too much. But over time, the mix of exhaustion, mental pressure, and chemical reliance created a fragile balance, one that was growing harder and harder to maintain. In public, Ledger was still magnetic. At press events, he was funny, sharp, disarming, the kind of presence that charmed instantly. He joked about playing the Joker, Tutterin talked warmly about his daughter, and brushed off questions about method, acting, but behind closed doors, his energy was clearly fading. Friends said he would smile on camera, then go home and collapse into silence. There were phone calls left unanswered, nights where he couldn't sleep no matter what he took. He was juggling fatherhood, fame, and the lingering demands of the role, all while pretending everything was fine. What the world saw was a rising legend. What those close to him saw was someone quietly burning out. By all professional measures, Heath was at the top of his game. The Dark Knight was generating buzz months before release. His performance as the Joker was being hailed as transformative, possibly career-defining. Studios were calling. Directors were lining up. But personally, he was unraveling. He was trying to be a present father, stay creative, manage a long-distance co-parenting arrangement, and battle a body that no longer rested. He had recently wrapped I'm Not There, and was preparing for the Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus. Two complex, demanding films. There was no break, no real recovery time. And although he was surrounded by admiration, he was also increasingly isolated. No success could quiet the noise in his head. It's impossible to separate Ledger's Joker from the chaos he carried privately. The character wasn't just anarchic. He was unknowable, driven by impulses that made no sense but felt emotionally true. In many ways, he mirrored the things Heath struggled with: the discomfort with identity, the fear of losing control, the sense that order and calm were illusions. The Joker didn't care about being understood. He embraced his own madness. That was the terrifying genius of Ledger's performance. It wasn't performative, it was personal. The laughs, the unpredictability, the deep sadness just beneath, all of it came from somewhere real. And in playing that role so completely, Heath may have given voice to parts of himself he'd never fully confronted. By early 2008, Heath's battle with sleep had become constant. He was prescribed multiple medications, Ambien for sleep, Xanax for anxiety, painkillers for lingering physical discomfort. But even the combination wasn't working. He often mixed them in hopes of rest, never recklessly but increasingly out of desperation. Friends recall him saying things like, "I just need one good night." He wasn't chasing a high, he was chasing peace. But the cocktail of drugs in his system grew dangerously complex. On January 22nd, he was found unconscious in his New York apartment. The autopsy later revealed a fatal combination of 6 prescription medications. It wasn't a deliberate overdose. It was a man trying and failing to quiet the storm inside. In the weeks leading up to his death, there was a subtle but undeniable shift in Heath Ledger's energy. Those closest to him began to worry. He still showed up to work, still professional, still committed, but his body was running on fumes. During interviews, he seemed scattered, distracted. Friends described him as physically present but emotionally checked out. On the set of the Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus, he would sometimes drift between takes, sitting quietly alone. One friend recalled a moment where Heath said almost offhandedly, "I'm so tired. My body is exhausted, but my mind just won't stop." He wasn't spiraling in obvious ways, but there was a weariness that everyone could feel, and nobody quite knew what to do with. In January 2008, Heath returned to New York, briefly free from set obligations. But even then, rest escaped him. He told the New York Times in what would be his final interview that he was sleeping maybe 2 hours a night. He was sick, battling a lingering cold, and yet he continued to push himself. He stayed in his Soho apartment, reading scripts, journaling, trying to plan what came next. His calls became less frequent. Friends said he sounded distant on the phone. His former partner, Michelle Williams, reportedly grew concerned. He was struggling with co-parenting across continents, creative burnout, and the same unrelenting insomnia. No single moment marks the collapse. It wasn't a dramatic breakdown, just a slow, invisible descent into quiet despair. When The Dark Knight was released, Heath Ledger had already left the world. What we witnessed on screen was a performance so haunting, so masterful, it was hard to separate art from the artist. But the real tragedy is this. While the world was celebrating a legend, the man behind the mask was fading. He gave everything to that role, not just time, but pieces of himself he couldn't recover. The Joker wasn't the cause of his death, but it became the symbol of a deeper truth. That brilliance, when left unchecked by rest or support, can become destructive. Heath Ledger didn't die because he played the Joker. He died because he was overwhelmed, exhausted, and, despite all his fame, profoundly alone. When the news broke on January 22, 2008, the world stopped. Heath Ledger, just 28 years old, had been found unconscious in his apartment. The media storm was immediate, chaotic, and often cruel. Rumors swirled, suicide, drugs, depression linked to his Joker role. Paparazzi camped outside his building. Fans left flowers and notes on the street. Celebrities tweeted their grief. Everyone wanted a reason, something to make sense of the loss. But for those who knew Heath personally, the news didn't come as a shock. It came as a devastating confirmation of the concern they had quietly held. It wasn't just that a great actor was gone. It was that a kind, sensitive, deeply thoughtful human being had finally run out of strength. The autopsy was released weeks later. It confirmed what some suspected and others hoped wasn't true. Heath Ledger died from an accidental overdose of prescription medications, a lethal mix of sleeping pills, anti-anxiety drugs, and painkillers. No illicit substances, no suicide note, no grand conspiracy. Just a dangerous cocktail of substances taken by a man trying to sleep. The medical examiner made it clear. It was unintentional. But that didn't make the loss feel any less permanent. If anything, it made it more tragic, because it showed how fragile the balance had become. He wasn't trying to escape life. He was trying to rest, to recover. Almost immediately, the world turned Ledger's death into a myth. Articles claimed the Joker had possessed him, that the roles had driven him mad. It was a comforting narrative, dramatic, tragic, clean. But the truth was far messier. Heath Ledger wasn't destroyed by a single role. He was undone by years of quiet struggle, with anxiety, with perfectionism, with the pressure of living up to the image everyone had of him. The Joker didn't break him, but it gave the world a symbol, a mask to point to. What we missed in that rush to explain was the deeper lesson, that even the most gifted among us are human. And without care, connection, and rest, even brilliance can become a burden. After Heath Ledger's death, tabloids ran wild with speculation. They painted him as a tortured soul consumed by his role, reckless, unstable, tragic. But his family pushed back. His sister Kate called it a complete fiction that the Joker had damaged him. She said Heath was proud of the performance, energized by the creative challenge. His father emphasized that the tragedy wasn't in his art. It was in the mix of medications, the exhaustion, and the lack of sleep. The Ledgers didn't deny his struggles, but they wanted the world to see him as more than a broken genius. He was a father, a brother, a kind, curious man who loved to laugh and surf and play chess. Those who worked with Heath Ledger didn't just remember a brilliant actor, they remembered someone deeply human. Christopher Nolan described him as fearless, endlessly inventive, and always generous on set. Jake Gyllenhaal, who became close to Heath during Brokeback Mountain, spoke about his quiet sensitivity, his desire to do honest work, and the intensity he carried beneath the surface. Others noted how quickly he shifted from deep focus to playful energy, like a light switch. But there was a fragility too, a pressure he put on himself that no one could relieve. He wanted to be exceptional, and in doing so, often forgot to be kind to himself. That's what so many of them say now, that Heath never knew how much was enough. In 2009, a year after his death, Heath Ledger won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. His parents and sister accepted it on his behalf, holding back tears as the room rose in a standing ovation. It was a moment of recognition, not just for the Joker, but for the extraordinary range and depth Heath brought to his craft. Yet the triumph couldn't hide the tragedy. The seat where he should have been was empty. The applause rang hollow for many, because while the world was finally honoring him the way he always deserved, he wasn't there to feel it. His Oscar became a symbol, not just of talent rewarded, but of how often we wait too long to celebrate the ones who are quietly falling apart. Heath Ledger's Joker became more than a villain. He became an archetype, the chaotic genius, the agent of destruction, the mask of pain. Culturally, the role was mythologized as both a career peak and a psychological curse, but the character's real resonance may be in how closely it mirrored Heath's own inner battles. The Joker is a figure who hides instability behind performance, who uses chaos to mask vulnerability, who laughs while crumbling inside. That image stuck because it felt uncomfortably close to something true. We love stories of genius, We idolize the artist who suffers for their work. The sleepless nights, the emotional breakdowns, the obsessive pursuit of something pure. But in doing so, we often miss the cost. We celebrate the performance, not the person. We quote the lines, but ignore the signals of burnout. Heath Ledger's death sparked sympathy, but also sensationalism. The media focused on the drama, the pills, the Joker, the mystery, and forgot to ask what support might have changed his path. We treat suffering as part of the package, as if talent must be tortured to be real. But that mindset doesn't honor the artist. It glorifies the pain, and leaves the next one just as vulnerable. Heath Ledger's story isn't unique in Hollywood, and that's the problem. The industry is filled with gifted performers battling private demons, trying to keep up appearances while feeling completely unmoored. The pressure to succeed, to stay relevant, to give everything to the next role. It's relentless. And often, there's no safety net. Therapy is stigmatized. Medication is self-managed. Long hours are expected. For every celebrated comeback, there are quiet collapses we never hear about. Ledger's death should have been a wake-up call. Not just about him, but about how the system fails people like him. Creative brilliance shouldn't require self-destruction. And we should stop calling it a tragedy only after it's too late. Heath Ledger's story isn't just about a life lost too soon. It's a mirror reflecting the quiet dangers so many of us carry. The need to be great, to prove ourselves away, to disappear into our work in the hope that we'll finally feel enough. Heath pushed himself relentlessly, not because anyone asked him to, but because he felt he had to earn his place, to silence the doubt, to keep climbing. He over-identified with every role, every performance, until there was almost nothing left to hold on to. The lesson here isn't about acting. It's about what happens when we ignore our limits, romanticize exhaustion, and mistake perfection for peace. Talent needs space to breathe. Without it, it starts to consume the person who holds it. Heath Ledger wasn't a victim of one role. He was a brilliant, restless, deeply sensitive human being, navigating fame, fatherhood, and a mind that never seemed to slow down. Those who knew him describe him as full of life, playful, curious, constantly creating. He wasn't just dark or tragic, he was also joyful, hilarious, generous. But he struggled. And in the silence between projects, or the pressure of the next big thing, those struggles grew louder. To remember Heath is to hold all of that complexity at once. The genius and the doubt, the laughter and the fatigue, the warmth and the ache. He mattered not because he was flawless, but because he showed us how human brilliance really is. We often treat stories like Heath Ledger's as distant tragedies, sad but separate from us. The truth is they're not. Most of us carry some version of what he felt. The anxiety of never being enough, the habit of defining ourselves by our output, the quiet voice saying, "Rest is weakness." Heath's story invites us to stop and ask, what are we chasing? And what is it costing us? Are we living our lives or performing them? It's easy to admire someone else's talent. It's harder to confront the pressure we put on ourselves. But if there's one thing worth learning here, it's this. Your worth isn't something you earn through achievement. It's something you protect, even when the world tells you to keep pushing. Heath once said, if you make decisions based upon people's reactions or judgments, then you make really boring choices. He wasn't interested in playing it safe, not in life, not in art. He wanted to feel everything, to stretch himself, to be real even when it hurt. That courage made his work unforgettable, but it also came at a cost. He wrestled with fear, with sleepless nights, with the pressure to always be more. Still, he kept showing up, and maybe that's what made him so magnetic. Not just his skill, but his vulnerability. He didn't hide it. He just tried to outwork it. And in the end, that battle was both the source of his brilliance and the reason he couldn't stay. Picture it again, Heath in full Joker makeup. Wild, chaotic, unforgettable. Next to him, the same man, barefaced, eyes tired, gaze hollow. One image won him an Oscar. The other told the story that award couldn't. This wasn't just the role that burned him out. It was the moment we saw how far someone could push for greatness before breaking. That contrast isn't just about Heath. It's about all of us. The version we show the world and the version we carry when the performance ends. The applause fades, the cameras stop, and the question remains, who am I when I'm no longer trying to impress anyone? Brilliance is never free, and sometimes being yourself is the hardest role of all. If this story moved you, take a moment to subscribe. We make videos like this to pause, reflect, and ask deeper questions about success, identity, and what it really means to live well. Like the video if it resonated, and share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think we miss when we only celebrate people for their achievements? Have you ever felt like you were performing more than living? And what helped you come back to yourself? And if you haven't seen it yet, our last video tells the true story of Ronald Reed, a quiet janitor who died with $8 million in the bank. It's a very different kind of legacy, but one just as revealing.